In this video, we will understand how healthcare workers should interpret the scores which are available in the CHAVI PROM application. Now, before we do that, let us understand a few key terms. The first is an instrument. An instrument basically refers to a set of items or questions which can measure a one or more construct. And a construct is basically a trait being measured. So whenever we have patient reported outcome measures, these are standardized measures because they measure a certain latent trait. For example, we want to measure the emotional functioning, the pain, the nausea that the patient is experiencing. A construct allows you to have a numerical score around this trait which is hard to measure objectively. An item is basically a question which is used to measure the construct. A construct can have one or more items, and a score is basically a numerical value which is assigned for the construct, and that is calculated using the responses provided to the items. The score direction indicates if it improves, that indicates a better state, or vice versa. In certain patient reported outcome measures, we have threshold scores which are numerical values behind which a score will be considered as clinically significant or pathological. These will be typically useful when you have disease specific symptom scores being measured. Another key term to understand is the minimum clinical important difference, also called as a MID. The minimal difference is basically a smallest difference in the score which will be considered as a clinically meaningful difference or a clinically important difference. Now, what does that mean? Suppose a VAS pain scale is measured between a score of 1 to 10, then a score difference of 2 is typically considered as clinically meaningful. And the next set of score metric that can be provided by several patient reported outcome measures, particularly where normal patient population scores have been taken, is a normative score. The normative score is different from a threshold score because it describes the average score for that construct in a normal population. Now, this, as you understood, cannot be obtained in constructs where a disease specific trait is being measured. For example, a patient reported outcome measure which measures the severity of radiation proctitis will not have a normative value because normal population is not expected to have normal patient population is not expected to have radiation proctitis. Before going into the interpretation, you need to know how to get into the site. Your account needs to be registered by the site admin team at your hospital. Your name also needs to be registered as a provider for the institution. Once your username has been created, it cannot be changed and the password is case sensitive. And a valid email is required for password recovery. After going to the application, you need to click on the login link, enter your username and password. We generally recommend that you set up a two-factor authentication also, and if you have set up a two-factor authentication, depending on the type that you have selected, it will ask you to provide a token before you log in. The token can be sent directly to your email, which is preferred. Alternatively, you can use a time-based OTP application like Google Authenticator to request an OTP on your device. This allows you to log in without requiring a separate email. If you do not want this device to be remembered, then please remember to uncheck the box because this is particularly important as a security measure in public computers. If you have forgotten your password, you can request that your password reset be done through email. In order to do that, you can click on the forgot password link, enter your email and click the reset my password button. If your email is registered on the system, you will receive a link which you can click to reset your password. Once you have logged in, you need to go to understand how to search for the patients. Now, in order to search for the patients, you need to go to the patients page, which you will see at the top bar. And when you click on this, it will show you a list of all patients which are registered on the system specific to your institution. Now, typically this application will be installed in a particular institution, but in case this application has responses from multiple institutions, then you will be able to view responses only for your institution. Please remember that if you are trying to search by the name or the ID, an exact search is required. because we store these name and IDs in an encrypted fashion in the database, and therefore we cannot provide a partial search. You can also filter this list by the institution, gender, the type of questionnaire that has been answered, diagnosis and treatment type, and you have to click this button called view responses in order to view the responses provided by the patient. Now the patient response page that opens has several sections. The first is a filter section which allows you to filter and dice the responses. Then we have a population comparison information which provides information about the patients being aggregated. The patient information section provides information about the patients you are trying to view. The top line results are the key constructs which need your attention. Other construct scores comprise of other constructs which are okay, and item wise results provide response to each question. It is important to remember that the response view provides you with summary statistics of other patient responses. So you cannot directly view the other patient responses here, but you can view what happens on an average to other patients at the same time point, and this is called as aggregated responses. Now, understanding how to filter the data, we have several filters in place, and the most important filter is the start date reference. Now the start date reference is not an exact date, but a date type. For example, you may say that it is the date at which carcinoma breast was diagnosed, and it will filter the responses of the other patients if they have this particular type of diagnosis date. And therefore, it allows you to choose the responses for the patient reported outcomes. Now, why is this important? This is important because we know that different groups of patients, for example, a breast cancer patient and a head neck cancer patient, may have different types of responses to the same item. For example, the EORTC QLQ C30 at different time points along their diagnosis. This actually allows you to filter by a particular date and thereby get a much better understanding of what other patient data will be. You can also select what are the types of registration date based upon the available dates here. For example, in this case we have 3 types of dates available for this particular patient: the date of registration, diagnosis and the start of neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Other filters allow you to select a time up to which the responses will be displayed. So here, for example, we are asking it to display up to 15 months responses from the start date. Remember, the default start date is the date of registration. And you can also choose to filter the number of responses that the patient has provided from 5 to 10 to 15 or all responses. Now, aggregation is an important new feature of this application, and it allows you to see what the population score is. We allow you not only to see the aggregation but also to define what type of aggregation metric you want to see. For example, the median, mean, standard deviation or 95% confidence intervals. We recommend that median is chosen given the fact that many of these aggregations will be done with a small number of patients and is kept as the default. You can also filter by gender, diagnosis, treatment types that are available. All of these will allow you to filter the responses for a particular set of patient reported outcomes. Now, why is this important? Because the same patient reported outcome questionnaire may be used across different diagnoses. And if you want to view an aggregated response, you would probably want to get the aggregated response matching the gender, diagnosis, etc., instead of having the patient reported outcome measure of all different types of patients in the system. The next type of filter that is available is a questionnaire filter and an item filter. This actually allows you to filter down or drill down by a particular type of questionnaire or a particular type of item that the patient has responded to. The population comparison section actually shows you the statistics regarding the number of patients which are contributing to the aggregation. So here, for example, when we choose different filter options, you can see that the number of contributing patients and the total number of responses that are provided, as well as the time intervals and the range of weeks over which the responses have been recorded, is changing. and this actually influences the aggregation statistics. Next, let's come to the patient information. The patient information section actually provides you with a quick overview of the diagnosis. This is arranged in a longitudinal format, and you can then see whether this treatment is ongoing or has finished. It also allows you to see the questionnaires that have been answered by the patients, the number of time the responses to these questionnaires have been submitted, indicated by that small 7 number in the blue icon, as well as the last date, which is 6th of December, on which this questionnaire was last submitted. This will be depicted separately if multiple questionnaires are being used for a single patient. Now, the next important section, and perhaps the most important part for the pro review page, is the top line results. Now, what do we mean by top line results? These have the constructs whose scores are concerning or need your attention and are significant. And how do we make this determination of significance is based upon the parameters of threshold scores and normative scores. Let's remember once more, threshold scores are thresholds beyond which a score would be considered as clinically meaningful or significant, and normative scores are population normal scores that are provided by the patient reported outcome measures. Now, threshold scores are typically take precedence over the normative scores, and if they are available, they are used to determine the clinical significance. That is because the threshold scores are the ones which indicate the presence of a pathology. If a minimal important difference metric is available for the patient reported outcome measure for a given construct, then that can be used to determine the significance of the score. So typically any value which is more than or less than this threshold score plus the MID would be considered as clinically significant. Now please remember that this also determines whether the score is significant based upon the direction of improvement. Let's take an example. Some of the scores, like functional scores in EORTC QLQ C30, have a direction of improvement where higher scores indicate better outcomes. On the other hand, there are scores like symptom scores where a lower score is better. So in this table, which is showing how the score will be interpreted if a lower score is better, so if the score that is reported by the patient exceeds the threshold score or the normative score, then it is considered as clinically significant, otherwise not. If the threshold score is absent, then the normative score is used for the determination of clinical significance as shown in this table. If the standard deviation is available, then we take a difference at least 0.5 standard deviations from this value, because this is typically what is used in patient reported outcome measures to determine clinical significance. Each top line result has the list of constructs and associated charts which provide information on the type of score that has been there and why this is being considered as meaningful. Each chart is a line chart where the score is plotted on the y-axis. The time is given in weeks, days or months, determining primarily by the type of units that you have selected. Now this is important to remember that we are not displaying the date, but you hover over the points in the line, you can see the date of response. The solid lines represent the patient response while the dotted lines represent the aggregated response. So in this plot, this black line is the patient's response while the dotted line is the response of the other patients. Now please remember, when we are calculating these aggregations, we exclude the index patient from the calculation because we want to see the scores of the other patients, not what will happen if this patient score is included. The top section shows the name of the construct followed by the score, which in this case is 53.3. The arrow on the side, this one, indicates the direction of the change, if it is good or bad. How do we determine if it is good? If you see that the color is green, that indicates that the score has improved. If you see it is red, it indicates worsening. If the arrow is pointing upwards, it means that the score has increased with respect to the past. So here, for example, you can see that the score has improved with respect to the last assessment. A dash indicates no change. So if you see a dash here, you will see also that the line is straight. The clinical significance text box, which is provided over here, allows you to understand why this is being considered as clinically significant. And this is a very important piece of information for you to understand. So in this example, we know that the threshold score is 70, which is indicated by this value is 70. Now the MID is actually 8, so which is reported over here. So minimally important difference from this threshold score, if it exceeds 8, it would be considered as clinically significant. Here the reported score is 53.3, which is around 16.7 points below what is the threshold score, and therefore we know the threshold score takes prominence over normative score. Therefore it shows that this is a clinically significant deterioration in physical functioning, although based upon the information that we have from the plot, it has improved with respect to the last, but it has still not reached what is considered as a threshold. The normative score over here is indicated by this gray straight line. It is also indicated by this value, and we can see that the normative score has these gray bands, which are basically the bands of standard deviation around the normative score. So in this case the standard deviation is 50. Here the threshold score and the normative scores are both the same, and therefore you can only see a single line. The aggregated scores are being depicted on the dotted lines, and these represent the median and interquartile range. So what you can see over here is that around the 25th week mark, this patient actually had a better physical functioning than most of the other patients in the database. But by the 45th week, which is at the week of last assessment when the score is reported as 53.3, you expect that this population score would be much higher, typically around 65. So again, this tells you that not only is this patient's functional status poorer than what is expected with respect to the threshold score, but also what is expected with respect to similar patients at a similar time point. This is another example of a top line chart where we are doing the score charting for a symptom scale called fatigue. What is the difference over here? You can see that the score is 55.6. Unlike the previous one, the fatigue scores have declined with respect to the previous one, and this decline is beneficial because fatigue is a symptom score. As indicated over here, a reduction is considered as beneficial. The normative score is indicated by this gray line and the threshold score by the orange line. So you can easily understand that this is above the threshold, and this is approximately 3.2 times the MID value. So this is considered as clinically significant. Again, you can see that if you see the aggregated response, the patient's trajectory has a very interesting picture. At the beginning, the patient had a worse fatigue as compared to what the population is. Towards the 25th week, we can see the fatigue score is actually better than the population. In fact, it is better than the lower part of the interquartile range. However, by the end of 45th week, the fatigue score has definitely worsened with respect to what is typically expected of the usual patients. So taking these 2 points together, you can now understand the interplay between the construct scores. There is a section called other construct scores, which displays the other constructs which are not clinically significant. Whichever is clinically significant is displayed in the top line results. Here also, if a normative score and threshold score is not defined, construct scores will appear in this section. We also have the ability to display composite construct scores, which are basically summations of scores created from multiple constructs. So for example, if you have a score like the FACT TOI index, which is basically a summation of 4 different FACT G scores, then you can see that composite construct score also in this section. The interpretation is quite similar. You have the day score, you have showing whether this is actually improved or worsened with respect to the previous one, and whether the direction of improvement indicates a better or worse outcome. Now let's come to the display of the individual items. For individual items, we display the longitudinal profile of each item that is answered. Now, why is this so? Because each item is a particular question, and each question can have value to you aside from the scoring that is being measured. Items which belong to constructs which are reported in the top line results are considered clinically significant will appear first before the other items. Now, the display that you will see depends upon the type of item, and Likert, range, and numeric values will be depicted with line plots. Text will be shown as a single text response because typically we do not have to interpret the change on the text quantitatively. And if the patient has recorded an audio or a video, you will see a media player which you can play to view the response. Now, the Likert type response is the most common type of response that is provided by users in the patient reported outcomes, and therefore we have provided a special few things in this display. It is of course a line plot. You can again hover over these points to see what is happening at these individual response times. What is important for you to know is that these are color coded. So the code that is provided, the color code that is provided, has shades depending on the value. So for example, if the item indicates is such that a higher score indicates a worse outcome, then the higher values will have darker shades and the lower will have lighter shades. The exact text response as well as the numeric value is represented over here, and the color code matches what is the color that is provided. You can also see the arrow which is provided, and a downward arrow indicates that the response value is less than the previous response. Here the green is indicating that it is a beneficial change because a decline in the score is considered better, and red indicates that this is a worse change. A dash indicates there is no change. So using this information that is provided, you would be able to use the pro response to determine which items need your attention and which questions need to be probed further from the patients. Thank you.